We're gonna cover some drop set techniques that I like to do that don't actually require you to drop weights. That could be beneficial if you're in a super busy gym and you can't really bring a lot of weights by you, or if you're a trainer and you can't take a lot of weights, you're in a small facility. So the first way I'm gonna show you guys is just super basic, and it is just going from doing a bilateral move to switching it to alternating unilateral. And you can do this with anything. I'm gonna show you guys a shoulder press, but what's good about this is you're able to squeeze more out because you kind of get like a little rest pause while one's working, the other is resting. But you also can produce a little bit more force because when we're alternating, we're not in this like bilateral position where we're just stiff and we're stuck. When we're alternating, we have our ribs internal rotating, external rotating. We have our spine flexing a little bit. So there's something called the spinal engine. We can actually produce a little more force through that. So I'll be at the gym, maybe I'll have up 120s and I'll be doing alternating 120s and on the shoulder press, and someone looks at me and thinks I'm just the strongest fucking freak ever, when in reality, I'm actually cheating. It's making that a little bit easier by getting that spinal engine to help. So I'll show you guys a shoulder press one. Want to pick a weight that you're gonna hit failure at about 8 to 10 reps. So let's say that's about failure. Lock it out, inhale down, exhale up. There should be a natural little side bend. Now, one thing you want to be careful when we're doing alternating is we're not trying to like side bend like a teapot. You don't want to tip over. So as I'm pressing, I don't want to just lean. What I'm going to do is I'm going to just compress these ribs. I'm going to internally rotate my ribs. So it's really just closing the distance between like my ribs and my hips. So it's just a little one. You don't want to completely side bend. That could create some issues. But if you do this right, it's actually going to help your mobility a lot. All right, so this drop set, where you don't actually have to drop the weight, incorporates what's called a dynamic EQI from FRC, their internal strength model. So what a dynamic EQI is it's a dynamic isometric, basically. Dynamic eccentric quasi-isometric is what it stands for. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna hit failure, or close to failure, and as soon as we get on that last rep, then we're gonna try to hold that position as long as we can, changing little tiny variables so we can squeeze a little bit more out of the muscle. So let me show you what I'm talking about. It'll make sense when you see it. So I'm gonna do a concentration style. You could do this standing. I just like having a little extra variation from this angle. So let's say I'm just doing normal concentration curl, in that 10 to 12 rep range to hit failure. And then when I'm getting there, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna try to maintain this elbow flexion as long as I can. I'm gonna keep that closed, and I'm gonna be able to make it last a little longer by changing some of these angles, changing the degrees of internal and external shoulder rotation, going through some pronation and supination. I'm trying to make this last as long as I can before I drop it. So I'm trying to make it an isometric, but it's slowly turning it into an involuntary eccentric. And you want this to be able to last about 30 seconds. And when you fail slow. Don't let it all go once you start to lose it. Woo! Big pump. So we're gonna cover another example of dropping to this dynamic EQI, and we're gonna use a dual pulley cable row. So these tend to lend themselves better to like pulling motions, pressing motions. You wanna get the most out of this. The goal on this is to keep the shoulder blades retracted. I'm focused on squeezing my shoulder blades. And so on my last rep, whenever I go to that dynamic EQI, I'm gonna try to keep them retracted, but I'm gonna go through elevation, I'm gonna bring them down, my elbows will change position, my palms will pronate and supinate, and all that is to keep that position a little bit longer by pulling from slightly different lines of tension, slightly little bits different parts of muscle. So for this drop set, we're gonna incorporate what's called a dynamic zone loading continuous tension set. I was doing these long before I started the FRC internal strength model, and I didn't call it that, but that's what they call it. And basically it's using different angles, different lines of tension to squeeze everything you can out of a muscle from doing basically the same motion. So I'll show you what I'm talking about. It's really similar to the dynamic EQI, but now instead of just isometric, we're moving concentrically as well. So I might set up for a tricep press down, and I'm just gonna keep my elbows fixed. I'm gonna go nice, normal, squeeze everything out of that. Let's say that was getting close to failure, 1 or 2 reps away. Then I'm gonna change a few things. I might pull my elbows back a little bit. That'll get a little more of my long head involved. I might flare my elbows out, pull that apart. change the angle a little bit. The same basic motion is still elbow extension, but I'm getting a little different parts and really getting to full failure. And usually with this type of drop sets, you're just gonna do one. If you're doing a continuous tension zone letting drop, you probably just need one set of that. Here's a slight variation that I actually like to implement a lot, doing the same exact thing, but we're switching to overhead. And so with that, I'll come out and just do my normal overhead extension, getting close to failure. So again, I'm gonna change those angles a little bit. I might go high. Now what you wanna be careful on this, as I go high, don't just extend, don't just flare those ribs, keep them down. I could come a little lower, flare out a little bit, change that angle down. Just really squeeze everything you can. If there's an easy zone, stay in there until you can't get any more out of that particular range. So your shoulders are awesome for this style of drop set, for these continuous tension zone letting sets in general, because you have so much variability. You can really pull from different fibers really easily. So I'm gonna do a variation using the cuff, because that gives me a little more options. We'll get a little stretch position, and this will be my angle I keep till I hit failure. And again, on these, you wanna get about 1 or 2 reps from failure. So let's say that's close to it. Now I'm gonna just change the angles a little bit. Like those back angles are really hard. I come hit these front ones, give myself a quick break, and I can come squeeze a few more from there. You also don't have to keep it totally linear. Oh, man. Now I'm gonna show you guys a dumbbell variation so you don't have to use the cuff if you don't have access to it. But same concept. I'm gonna kind of pick one range to hit failure at. My left arm's a lot more tired. Say that's right at failure. But I'm gonna just change. And as you're getting close to failure, you can even cheat a little bit. Again, cheat with a stack. Don't flare open those ribs, you're gonna miss some activation. Whew. After doing some of these dynamic zone loading sets, should definitely have some pump, some cannonball delts going. So let me show you guys a few more examples of drop sets I like to implement. So this is what you call a mechanical drop set. And the way it works is you start with kind of the most disadvantageous position you can get. And as you get fatigued, you kind of shorten the lever arm to make that a little easier. So I'll show you a couple examples. Flies for your chest are really good to do on this. So I might start really long arm, squeezing everything I can out of that. And as I'm getting close to failure, to make that a little easier, I might get a slight bend in those elbows. Make it slightly closer to a press. I'm still keeping the same fly motion, I'm just changing that lever though. And by the time you get done, you might be pretty bent, just squeezing it out from there. So here's another example of a mechanical drop set for your lats. We're gonna start with a straight arm lat pull. Now when you're doing this, if you start with a little hinge, you'll get more out of that stretch position, then kind of stand as you pull down, you'll get that full shorten range. So I'm gonna start real long arms. And as it gets a little heavier at that end range, I'm gonna start getting a little bend to these elbows. But as you bend these elbows, don't turn it into a row. It's still a lat pull down. You need to push those shoulders to the ground, don't retract them. So now I'm gonna get more bent. And that way you can really squeeze every last drop out of those lats. So you might be able to see that there's some overlap with these. You could actually, double or triple these up even. You don't have to get too crazy, but I'll just show you an example that I do a lot where I really squeeze a lot by doing 2 different kinds of drop sets in one. So I'll start, normal curls. Say I'm at failure. I'm gonna switch to some zone loading, continuous tension. Just really squeeze everything I can out of there. And as I'm getting close to failure on that, I might go ahead and drop to an alternating to squeeze the last little bit out of there. I mean, really, technically you wanna get real crazy, you could finish with that dynamic EQI even. Not really necessary, it might be a little overkill. But you can combine a lot, like with shoulders, I'll do kind of the same thing. I'll hit this, go into zone loading, and then sometimes change the lever. So a lot of different ways you can implement these. So these are just some of the things that I do that tend to be a little unique to my style of training that I want to share with you guys. So give it a shot, let me know what you think. I'm really trying to put out more content for you, so if you have any specific requests or anything, please let me know. I appreciate it, guys. Thanks.